Since March is Women's History Month, I decided I would share this story with you. Advocates of women's rights owe a debt of gratitude to Congressman Howard Smith. You see, he proposed adding a word to a law, which became a very powerful law for women in this country. In fact, it changed women's history in this country. The law was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That law was originally conceived by President Kennedy, and after his death was carried through by President Johnson. The goal was to help African Americans with their civil rights. Title VII of that law was originally was to ensure equal employment opportunity regardless of race, color, religion, or national origin. But then Congressman Howard Smith of Virginia proposed adding the word sex as a fifth protected classification, to making it illegal to discriminate against, in particular, women in employment situations. But the strange thing was, I read the Congressional Record on this, and the strange thing was that right after he proposed adding the word sex, he spent about 5 minutes talking about a ridiculous letter he had gotten from a woman who said, "I feel discriminated against because there are 2.6 million more women in this country than men, and it is my right to be able to find my own husband, and there are too many women out there, and I want President Johnson and Congress to fix this right away." Well, as you can imagine, that got quite a laugh. I can tell in the Congressional Record because there's a break in what he's saying, and he makes some comment about the laughter. And then it was so confusing because then a number of gentlemen from the South also stood up and said they were for adding the word sex as a protected classification. But then they mostly also made jokes about women. Why do they want to help women and then we're telling jokes at women's expense? Well, the New York Herald Tribune wrote the next day that adding the word sex was one of the many additions that Southerners had proposed to delay or disrupt or weaken the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Or a congressman from Alabama later explained, Howard Smith didn't give a damn about women's rights, but he knew there was always a hard core of men in Congress who were against women's rights. He added the word sex, hoping that he would get more votes against the whole bill. There was one Southern gentleman who did speak up genuinely in favor of adding the word sex, and I would like his name, Mr. Ross Bass from Tennessee, to be remembered. I guess I'd also like to tell you, being from New York, that two congressmen from our wonderful state spoke up against adding the word. Emanuel Seller, who made a joke about women, and John Lindsay, soon to become mayor of New York City. Well, at least he didn't make a joke. But then the congresswomen started speaking. First, Congresswoman Martha Griffiths from Michigan said, "I was going to make a point that women are a second-class sex to start my remarks, but the laughter we've heard in the chamber today has already proved my point." She then went on to a very lengthy legalistic argument as to why the word sex had to be added. She ended succinctly by saying, "A vote by a white man today against adding the word sex is a vote against his wife or his widow or his daughter or his sister." Then a congresswoman from our state, Catherine St. George, got up and she said, It is perfectly logical to add the word sex to this bill. In some states, women cannot serve on juries. I could not believe that. In my lifetime, women could not serve on juries in some states. She went on, in some states, women do not have equal educational opportunities. And in most states, despite the law that was passed last year, I would say that women do not get equal pay for equal work. Adding that terrifying little word, sex, will improve this law. It will make it comprehensive, it will make it logical, it will make it right. Other congresswomen spoke for adding the word, but one traitorous little so-and-so from Oregon, Edith Green, spoke against it. She said, adding the word sex will clutter up this bill. For every discrimination that a woman has faced in this country, the Negro has faced 10 times more. Now, I agreed with what she said about the magnitude of discrimination, but here was a woman in my lifetime asking women to wait yet again. You see, I knew enough of women's history to know that back when the Constitution was being written, Abigail Adams wrote her husband John and said, "Remember the ladies." But he didn't, and the ladies waited. In the 1800s, when the abolitionists, People Against Slavery, and the suffragists, People for Women Voting, were both working at the same time, the women were told to wait, and they did. The 15th Amendment, which ensures citizens the right to vote regardless of race, passed in 1870. The 19th Amendment, ensuring the right of citizens to vote regardless of sex, passed 50 years later in 1920. Only one woman who had been at Seneca Falls in 1848 at that first meeting of women's rights in this country, only one woman was still alive to vote in 1920. And here was a woman once again in 1964 asking women to wait? Well, when the discussions were over, it was time to vote. Congresswoman Martha Griffiths prevented a voice vote by demanding a teller vote. Now, that's a vote that doesn't exist anymore in this day of electronic voting. But back then, you had a voice vote and you had a roll call vote, and right in the middle was a teller vote, where each vote was individually counted, but the names were not recorded. So a teller vote was used to vote whether the word sex should be added, and it only passed by 35 votes, which might not have been obvious if it had just been a voice vote. Well, the bill had grave problems in the Senate, but eventually passed and was signed into law on July 2nd, 1964, the year I graduated from middle school, and about 180 years after the Constitution had been written. It seems as if for women's rights, everything was going to be fine because there was a law and there was also the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission had been formed. But they were not behind it at all. The head was asked, "What are you going to do about sex discrimination?" And the head, FDR Jr., said, "Sex discrimination? Oh, I guess we'll have to insist that boys can be Playboy bunnies." But what happened after that, well, that's a different story. Right now, I would just like to end by saying that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 with Title VII and the word sex has proved to be a very powerful law for women in this country. It protects women to this day. It's the law that's cited in cases of sex discrimination and sexual harassment at work. And so thank you, Congressman Smith from Virginia, who, without intending to, helped create that law.